Go well. Hi everyone. Welcome to our third FUTO video podcast. We got with us a very esteemed guest, Luis. Hi, Luis. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's a pleasure. Today we're going to talk about. There's many different ways to phrase it, but one of the ways to phrase it is to how to escape the digital prison of Google and Apple, specifically on your mobile device. So, if you ever wanted to know what it's like to live outside the walled garden of Apple and Google, now is your time. So, Luis, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, how did you end up in front of this beautiful fireplace with us here?
I have a repair shop in New York City where I also do YouTube videos teaching people how to fix their own stuff. That led to this right to repair movement where there's an encouragement of more and more people to get involved in fixing their own stuff, which really digs into the concept of if you can't fix your device, who owns it? So part of that is right to repair. If you can't fix your own device, you don't own it. The flip side of that is if Google is spying on everything that you are doing on the device that you paid $500 for, do you actually own it? And part of what we're going to be discussing today is how you can take back ownership of your device from companies like Google or Apple.
Right. So, a lot of people would ask, it's like, well, my iPhone's awesome, right? It pairs with my iWatch. It gives me check-in tickets to my flights, everything. What's wrong, right? Currently, the system as such is great. What is wrong with it? What was your wake-up lesson? What was your sort of moment when you're like, oh, wow, there's something weird here?
2019, when I checked out Google Takeout for my YouTube videos, I wanted to
What's that? Describe Google Takeout. What is it?
Google Takeout is a thing where you can download all of the data that you have ever given Google. I was just looking for my YouTube videos. I wanted to download a backup copy of all my originals because one of my backups was dying and I wanted to have another copy. So I check it out and I see that there's a section for Android and I see there's a section for voice recordings and I'm thinking, that's a lot of voice recordings. I don't remember doing any of that. But I used this feature called voice to text where I could look into my phone and do this. Like I just say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and it will actually show it on the screen. So, when I switched over to an Android phone from using a BlackBerry, I thought, how am I going to get around using a physical keyboard? But the voice to text was so good, I didn't use the physical keyboard. What I didn't realize is that every single voice recording, every single argument with my girlfriend, everything I typed into this damn thing when I was drunk or aggravated or saying something I probably shouldn't have been said, not only was being stored on Google servers forever, but also was being indexed in a manner and transcribed to where I could actually search for certain words. So I searched for the name of an ex-girlfriend from 10 years ago, and I could find what I said, and then I could download the little voice clip recording of me saying it. And there were people that said, that's your fault, you agreed to it. And it's it kind of feels like if you give a woman a drink and she drinks it and then she passes out saying, well, I guess you agreed to it. I felt like I got EULA roofied. I would have never agreed to this.
What's a EULA?
The end user license agreement. That's, usually 800 or 900 pages that you agree to when you first get the device that none of you actually read. And if I know some of you in the comments are going to say that you read it, you're lying. No, you don't. None of us read that.
There's no way
because we have a life.
Yeah, there's no way to read it.
And even if you did read it, half of it's not going to make sense because it's written in legalese and other bullshit. They'll find a way to get you to be okay with giving away everything. And I think this kind of shit started around 2004 when Gmail came out. We are cheap dates. What was it, 15 megabytes for an attachment and 1 gigabyte of storage was enough for us to let robots from Google just crawl through our email and use it to advertise to us? And I think we've been cheap dates ever since. And that's the problem.
I couldn't have said it better. But, again, to play the devil's advocate, it's like, oh, well, I guess I don't use Google devices. I use iPhone, right? I'm better. Apple respects privacy, right? But no. That's been my experience, right? So I did the equivalent of the Apple takeout, right? Apple also has takeout. You log into your iCloud, you click wherever you need to click, and 5 days or 7 days later, because they put a time delay in it, so you forget about that shit. But no, you can actually get your everything from your Apple account you've ever done, said, bought, clicked, ever, right? It's the equivalent of Google Takeout. So let's call it the Apple Takeout. So eventually you get your Apple Takeout, which will be all your photos, all your movies, but also every single thing you've ever purchased from Apple that you clicked. And so I looked at it. I'm like, okay, well, nothing so special here. It's a bunch of photos. Okay, all so far so good. But then I looked like, oh, podcasts. I'm like, oh, podcasts. It's like, oh my God, I don't even remember. Any podcast that you listen to on your Apple phone is actually directly linking with Apple. It's not that Apple hosts a podcast, but they record every effing mouse click or like touch screen click. So it said me that 15 years ago, I guess that was like 2007, literally when the iPhone came about and the App Store, was that there was this specific podcast that I downloaded at this specific time, UTC, and then I proceeded to play that podcast 5 seconds later, and then 36 seconds later, I paused it. There was a 2-minute break, and then I unpaused it and listened for the entirety of that podcast uninterrupted 15 years ago. Now, you might say, what's the big deal, right? Who gives a shit about your little podcast? But I'm like, oh my God, that's just like such a mind-bending level of detail.
Yeah, imagine if somebody, like people would say, well, who cares about that? But if somebody were staring through your window late at night because you didn't have blinds, writing down what you did and wrote down that 15 years ago at 7:37 p.m.
and
you
recorded
paused,
it forever.
That's creepy. That's weird. And the thing is, Google does the same shit. All of that type of stuff was in Google Takeout. It wasn't necessarily as creepy as the voice recordings for 10 years, but it's still there. And I think if people knew that and knew that there were viable alternatives, they would be open to using those viable alternatives that don't do that.
So that brings us to the big two questions, like what is the choice, and does it suck, right? And it's tricky, right? The short answer, there is choice. You can get out of Google's grasp and out of Apple's walled garden, but right now it's not so easy, but it's doable. So let's talk about the whole framework. Like, how does this work, right? What devices, what phones, in other words, what phones do we use? What kind of operating systems do we put on them? And how does that get us rid of Apple and Google?
Well, what I have here is a Pixel 4a 5G that you can get pretty cheaply now, and I have this extended battery case because I'll do live streams for hours on end with it that kill the battery. But yeah, this is a pretty good phone, and I was able to get it from Calyx Institute. If you give them a donation, you will get a phone. So I got a phone that has this pre-installed. It has the bootloader unlocked. And the cool thing about CalyxOS is it uses the Android open source project, which is what the Android that goes on.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, right? We mentioned there's a lot of buzzwords in there, right? We got the Calyx Institute, we got the bootloader, we got the Pixel, we got Android, right? Those are all full buzzwords. You know, the tech nerdies listening to us might know, but let's unpack it to someone who might not be technically inclined, right? In other words, are there other operating systems possible for your phone that are not the Google stock Android or the iOS?
Yeah, before you.
Okay, so we were talking about the alternatives, right? So let's unpack this again. Remember, it's for a lot of people, you know, like 70-80% of Americans have iOS, and in other words, they have Apple, right? So on an Apple device is then an alternative operating system? Fortunately, the answer is no. If you own an iPhone, you're stuck on an iPhone. There's kind of no escaping Apple. Apple has you. You can turn the iCloud off. You can do all kinds of like VPN filtering, but you can't really escape Apple. But suppose you switch to an Android device. What alternatives do you have?
You have a number of different operating systems that are based on the Android open source project, which is what is most likely what is on your phone.
And what's the Android open source operating project?
That is what the versions of Android that are on your phone, if you buy a Samsung or an LG or a OnePlus, they're all based on. So they're all based on that, and they add Google services and Google libraries on top, and sometimes your carrier like AT&T and Verizon will add a bunch of garbage that you don't actually want on there. Mm-hmm. But everything gets added on top of that base Android open source project, which Google does keep open source.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so there's this like, let's call it a clean version of Android, right? For in a normal, simple English. There's a clean version that doesn't have the bloatware or like poisonous stuff from from Google and from your operator. Like, we're not gonna name specific cell phone operators, but how's that work in practice? Like, first of all, how do you get that? Can you put that on any phone? Does it have to be an unlocked version of a phone? Can it be an operator lock version of a phone? How do you get it onto it? And then what does the day-to-day life look like?
Well, the first problem here is you have to pick a special phone which has an unlocked bootloader. So this just shows how much freedom we've had taken away from us. If you buy almost any laptop computer or desktop computer and you want to install a different operating system on it and it doesn't work, you would take that back to the store and say, this is defective. This is broken, what you sold me. But with phones, we've come to expect that the carrier or the manufacturer can tell us, you can only use our operating system on this. I can install Windows 10 on this. I could install Windows XP on this if I wanted to. I could install Linux, anything on the computer that I buy. But on the phone, you have to find a phone that has an unlocked bootloader. And that's sometimes difficult to do because they don't make it obvious whether the bootloader is locked or not. And when you go to a store at Best Buy, half of the time they don't even know.
Well, they didn't even know what a bootloader is.
Yeah, so when Aaron asked, does this have an unlocked bootloader? The person understood that as, is this unlocked so I can use it on other carriers like AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile? He didn't hear it as, does it have an unlocked bootloader so I can install my own OS? So half of the time, even if you're asking the right question, you won't even be able to get a phone that has an unlocked bootloader, which is necessary for you to be able to install the operating system of your choice.
That's right. So it's a little bit, a lot of people point out, it's a little bit of an irony. If we want to escape Google, we got to get a Google device. So why is that not a problem? Or it's a problem, but when you put a specific version of an open source Android, it renders that problem away or obsolete. So talk to us about Calyx, which is the version of the operating system that you're using. How easy was it to put it on the device, and what's the sort of day-to-day?
Well, this is completely idiot-proof because they will sell you the device with the operating system already on it.
There you go.
I didn't have to unlock a bootloader. I didn't have to ask, hey, are you sure this is unlocked? I didn't have to, do any sort of compiling or anything. You can just literally get this phone with the operating system already installed on it. And it works pretty well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so we really want to mention the open source projects that support all this, and Calyx and Calyx Institute, right, is definitely one of them, and they're doing heroic work liberating people from the digital prison. Another one we most definitely need to mention is Graphene, and Graphene operating system that you can get pre-installed, but usually people install it themselves, and it's actually really simple to do. I just did it here half an hour ago. It took me about 10 minutes. You just plug it into your computer. You go to a website, I think GrapheneOS.com, and the website will do it. You just push buttons on a website. It's so easy to do. And by the time 10 minutes is up, you have de-Googled your phone. It's really quite magical. And then you have an empty phone that doesn't phone home. In other words, it doesn't talk to Google unless you tell it to. And you can install any apps you want. You can install all the Google apps from the Google App Store, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. But you've just done the first step in liberating yourself from the digital prison that you've been in for the past 15 years. So now that you've done that, what is the day-to-day life look like? What's good and what's the not so good?
Well, the thing is, you lose a lot of the Google services when you actually get this phone. So, for instance, if you're using, correct me if I'm wrong, with Graphene, if you want to use Uber or Lyft on that device, what is the experience like?
Okay, so now we're getting into the technical weeds. So let's do that, right? So let's get optimistic and first talk about the great things before we delve into the negative things. Right? So how's your day-to-day and
the day-to-day
feel not being surveilled by Google?
The day-to-day is not being surveilled by Google is great, and the great thing about Calyx is that for a lot of the negatives, they have a positive counterbalance in that they've come up with alternatives to these services. So I can use Uber or Lyft. I can, type into the phone the same way that I would before with a Android open source keyboard without using Google's keyboard, which is, which can see every keystroke I make and listen to my voice recordings and associate them with my account for 12 years. You can use a different YouTube viewer other than just the YouTube app. So you can view YouTube without actually doing it.
And you can install apps without telling Google who you are, for example.
Yeah, the Aurora Store and the F-Droid Store are both great in that I can install all the applications that I want without Google having to know that I've installed them.
Right.
I can put Firefox or Citibank or Bloomberg News or whatever the hell you want to put on your phone.
Which is how it used to be, right? And again, computers used to just install software, or you could write the software yourself. And nobody knew you did it. Computers were supposed to do just exactly and only what you told them to do.
Yeah, not associate every single thing you do with an account that is tied to your name, address, phone number, etc.
Right. So the day-to-day is basically, for someone that uses Android, almost the same as if you were using the Google Android. There's little few exceptions here and there.
I could do just about everything I did before. I can live stream using a different app than the YouTube app if I want. I can use I can use the Streamlabs app to do that. I can do my messaging on Signal and Telegram. I can do my browsing with Firefox. The dialer app works. I can install a voice over IP app like Zoiper to be able to do, use my work PBX to be able to take work phone calls. Just, I'm able to use a password manager. All of that stuff works the way it did before.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I really want to highlight. So since we're now in the technical weeds, CalyxOS is most definitely recommended because the transition shock is the least. CalyxOS works basically almost like a normal Google-fied Android. Almost. There's a few little exceptions here and there, but your day-to-day experience will be very smooth. It's mostly recommended for just people that want to have a normal life. And for those, however, that want something a bit more spicy, like a bit Sichuan spicy food, we most definitely recommend GrapheneOS. Now, the difference, I guess, between Calyx and Graphene out of the box, Graphene comes out, it's another distribution of the AOSP Android open source distribution, is that it comes without Google Play. And Google Play is essentially, you could imagine that as a bit of a troll that sits in your phone and controls everything the phone does and reports it to Google, right? Now, Calyx doesn't have that. It has a kind of a workaround about it. But in Graphene, it doesn't even have by default. You can install it if you want. You can put the troll back in if you want. That's the beauty about computers. If you tell it so, it will put the Google daemon back in. But by default, it doesn't, right? In other words, when you just install a stock Graphene, as I've just done, just before we started this show, it doesn't come with any Google. Now, that has its upsides that you reach maximum privacy and sovereignty. It's a wonderful feeling. And for some people, they go with that. However, and we should be fair to mention some of the downsides. You remove Google Play from your Android, some apps will simply stop working, right?
So you want to take a taxi, it's 1 a.m, and there's no official city taxis around. You install Uber and you go to get a car. What happens?
Well, on CalyxOS on your phone, it will work wonderfully and flawlessly, and you're all good. And therefore, for most day-to-day uses, I recommend Calyx. However, on my phone, on Graphene, Uber will simply refuse to work, right? And that's unless you put the Google Play back in. And I don't want to trigger any developers out there who will point out the obvious. Yes, you can put the Google Play back in and Uber will kind of work. But if you just simply don't, imagine a life, and this is kind of hard to imagine in 2022. Imagine your digital life and normal offline life where you want to go without being observed by Google. What is that like? It works, but it has its significant drawbacks. One of those, and probably the only one, is Uber. Everything else works. I download my own copy of Wikipedia. I browse Wikipedia. It has maps. Here I want to highlight OSM Plus. They're an amazing map source. You can install a ton of open source apps from F-Droid repository, right? An alternative app store. Again, the app store doesn't track who you are. You can just download apps without telling it username, password, no name, no phones, nothing, right? No credit card information. So, 2 a.m. stuck in New York and you want to take an Uber on Graphene, yeah, that's going to be tough. But on Calyx, you'll be fine.
I actually was trying to show you that it would be fine, and as I was trying to show you that it would be fine, it wasn't catching my location until I force quit Uber and opened it back up again. But now it works.
That's fine. But
now now it's actually working. I had literally just closed Uber and reopened it. It has my if you open Uber without the location on a normal Android phone, but then hit location, it immediately works. Here, I opened Uber without location.
Just reboot, yeah.
It tried to guess where I was based on cell phone tower or something, and then I restarted it and it worked. And it uses something called Mapbox. This is not using. Yes. Yeah, doesn't look like it's using Google Maps. Mm-hmm. So that I'm not using Google services, but I do have the functionality of being able to get an Uber. Now is that the little type of bugginess gonna mess somebody up? It may mess up a less technically savvy user because
just restart the app. Just restart the app.
Yeah, that does it. It's little things like that you notice that make it feel like it's a little bit more buggy.
Running these systems also makes you aware just how much you're surveilled. And if you turn the surveillance off, so many of the systems just simply will refuse to work. It makes you even more aware of how much of a digital prison you're in, you know. To me, that was a very interesting experience.
The thing that's interesting to me is all these workarounds that had to be created for you to have what you had before without surveillance. It's just
Right.
no,
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, like everything that has to be rebuilt. Just like when you use something like the Organic Maps app and you see, okay, this entire database of every single business and all these different locations and what they're called, all of this has to be recreated just so that you have something that doesn't track you.
Imagine millions and millions of people escaping the digital prison of Apple and Google. How could we bring that future about? What would need to happen? How do we make these systems even better? They're pretty good, but how do we make them even better?
I mean, the first thing I think that needs to be done is identifying the specific items that make it less usable for the average user. So like finding all these little bugs, finding the things that make the experience different. Because again, the reason that the Google services are as good as they are is because they are monetizing you. Like you're the product. And they are monetizing you and using that money to be able to pay the developers and the engineers that make all of this good. The people that are not harvesting your information, that are not harvesting your data and selling it, they do not have a revenue stream to have, a team of engineers making $400,000 a year to focus on all these things. So what we need to do is we need to take a list, take an inventory of all the items that make this less usable for the average user, and then create bounties and projects that we then fund to make these things better. Like, well, for instance, one thing that I was bringing up the other day, which is probably kind of dorky. I was trying the Android open source keyboard and a Android open source project keyboard and also OpenBoard, and then I was comparing it to the Google keyboard. I hate Google, but goddamn, they make a nice keyboard. Like
they do.
It knows me better than I know myself. Even when I'm not logged in, it has an idea of exactly when to autocorrect, exactly when not to autocorrect. That is just second to none. Like. Now they have a good amount of resources available to
billions
disposal.
of dollars, billions of users, and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of programmers. So, of course, Google is an excellent engineering organization. However, the business model is deeply troubling. For example, on these Pixel 6 phones, you can get open source camera apps, right? You can get the one that comes in with Calyx, you can get the one that comes with Graphene, but let's just put it diplomatically, they just use the very basic API, so they don't reap the full benefit of like these 4 sensors that you have on the back of a Pixel 6 Pro. So what you end up doing is, even if you don't have the Google Play, you still install the stock Google camera app, because that app actually has a ton of machine learning, deep learning, a lot of AI behind it, so it can take amazing portrait photos that are leagues ahead of any iPhone photo. But you keep that little app in its own little cage, because the phone allows you to take away its internet permission or any other permissions. You control what the apps can do, not Google. You control that. So you take all the permissions away from the app, and it's in a little cage sitting in a corner doing just exactly and only the thing that you told it to do. So, in conclusion, the future is bright, but FUTO and our grant program can make it even brighter, right?
Yeah, I mean, our place here is going to be finding the people that are able to take all these items that are a little bit glitchy and ask them, what do you need to make this better? Right. And then providing what they need to make it better. So, I mean, I know with Graphene and with Calyx, I know they were both recipients of legendary grants recently for the work that they've done. And I mean, if they continue to do this type of work into the future, which I hope they do, we'd be open to future collaboration. But if there are other people out there that are able to say, okay, this issue that you had with this little bug with Uber, or, hey, I have a way to make a keyboard that is as good, or at least like 99% as good as the Google one without constantly spying on you. Here are the few things that could be tweaked. We want to hear it. Like, we want to hear what it is you believe you can do to contribute to all of these systems being better, because we want to be a part of the problem. Yeah, we want to be part of the solution, not the problem. Unlike what I just said that Peter's going to edit out.
That's all good. That's all good. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Luis. Real pleasure, and I really hope we get to talk about again on some similar topic like that in front of our beautiful fireplace that we're not running off Google. Just want to mention that. Well, thank you all for watching the Digital Defiance podcast number 3.